Hello and welcome to the After Sermon podcast, where we talk about a Bible topic, character, or concept. And today we're talking about God's victory over sin and Satan as we discuss the sermon, The Downfalls of Satan. Hello and welcome to the After Sermon podcast. We're very glad that you can join us. It's been a while since we've recorded, but we're glad to be sitting back in our kind of virtual studio. And of course, it's just not a podcast unless I'm joined by someone with some good brains, good looking, all these good attributes. So I had to call in Jesse Marks. How are you doing, Jesse?
I am doing well, and you were honestly too kind, Mr. Peterson.
Well, I just figure I butter up my co-hosts, and they're always willing to come back, after some kind words. So
it's a good strategy. I mean, well, I'm here, so it's obviously working.
And we're up to episode 45, and you were in episode number 1. So
and there you go. Time flies. That's insane. That is insane.
That's right. And so really, I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but this year most likely will be the final year for the After Sermon podcast. So the goal that we have is to reach episode 50. It's a nice milestone number, and I think it'd be a nice time to kind of celebrate what we've done together. And I'm just kind of getting a bit too busy to keep up the podcast forever. But I really think the podcast has done a great number of things, has reached out to so many people. And so I didn't want to just retire it unceremoniously. I thought, let's get to 50. Let's make it a nice milestone number. And that'll be kind of the end of a nice chapter that we've had there. So here we go. We're on the road to episode 50, Jesse.
We're getting close. We're getting very close.
Very close. And we'll probably share some more memories of our journey along the way when we hit 50. But seeing as I've got you here, I remember episode 1, we recorded in my bedroom. We just were like at this table with one mic, and we're like leaning all the way in for this mic, And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is like, Steve Jobs starts in a garage and becomes big, man. This is our garage.
This is the start.
That's it. And look, we have grown, and we're so glad that so many of you find value in listening to what we have to say. We don't know everything, but we really enjoy just really talking about these meaningful topics, and we're glad that you are getting some of that value out of that as well. So. Well, look, let's just get into things, shall we? So the sermon today is entitled The Downfalls of Satan. And of course, if you haven't listened to the sermon yet, make sure you do, because this podcast is full of sermon spoilers. But also, I want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Cale DeWaal. He wrote a paper called The Downfalls of Satan. And I took a lot of what he wrote and put it into my own words. So I want to make sure I give credit to him there. He's kind of the brains of the operation. I was just the face of it this time round. And look, I think it'd be good to give a quick crash course. Maybe you can do this for us, Jesse. We're going to be talking a lot about Satan. But it can be a bit confusing. Who is Satan? Like, was he always bad? Yeah, who are we talking about here? Can you give us a bit of a rundown on who Satan is?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So Satan, or I think as you said in your sermon, the Satan. It's a title. It means the adversary. And then he's this ominous figure in scripture that he keeps popping around all the spot. But basically, from beginning to end, Satan is originally an angel. He's a cherub in heaven, and the cherubs are one of the highest. There's different ranks of angels, and cherubs are pretty well at the top. I think you mentioned in your sermon as well that they surround the throne room of God. So you can't pretty much get any higher than that. And so Satan was one of these cherubs in heaven. And he, being so close to God, something mysterious, we don't exactly know why, but he developed the thoughts of envy and selfishness, and he found himself wanting to take the place of God. He found himself wanting to sit on that throne, and over time those thoughts developed, and he eventually he got so worked up in that idea that he started spreading his lies about God with the other angels in heaven, saying, God's not actually a good ruler. He's actually deceiving us. This law that he's set up, we can't follow it. It's unjust that he requires us to follow this law, the way he runs the universe. And so he started spreading these lies, and he eventually worked up a bit of a following and tried to take the throne of God. And the Bible describes like a conflict in heaven. We don't really know the nature of that conflict, but yeah, eventually it ends up that he is kicked out of heaven, and he makes his way down to earth. And if you're familiar with the story in the Bible, he appears as a snake to Eve, and he deceives us, and he deceives the whole human race and enters the whole human race into sin and rebellion against God with him. And then from there, it's just a sad story of him continually making woe on humanity, deceiving us and enticing us into his rebellion against God. And in a nutshell, we'll delve into it more, I'm sure, as we continue the podcast. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's him. Once a good angel who was in a high position but fallen. He wanted God's place, he wanted God's throne, and now he is in rebellion against God and anyone that is with God. And in a nutshell, he's not a good character.
Oh, so listening to that story, a question that comes into my mind is, all right, so Satan rebels, and because of that rebellion, he brings with him all this pain and evil and suffering to our world. Why doesn't God just kind of snuff out Lucifer as soon as he rebels? Like he'd spare us, all of this pain we have to go through. Why not just get rid of Lucifer? What was God thinking?
Yeah, very good question. And like, it's a very good question that often like theologians and people in the church debate about a lot. But I think at the heart of it, Satan was raising some serious allegations and questions about the way that God was ruling the universe. He was, and to a great degree, I believe, creating distrust among many of the angels and other created beings and us. And if God was to just immediately snap out Satan without, I guess, the full extent of what he was insinuating, played out, it could have created some serious doubt among the other angels, among the other created beings. And it might have given credence to some of Satan's arguments. Okay, this one guy starts asking questions about God, and God immediately snuffs him out. I mean, what does that say about God? It's like maybe Satan's onto something. Maybe he's not actually as good as he says he is. And so if God was to immediately snuff out Satan, it would, I think, give credence perhaps to some of Satan's questions that he was raising against God and the way God ruled the universe. And so God, being the all-wise God that he is, he decided to let things play out. And as we will, I'm sure we'll discuss this further, he wanted to reveal the true color of Satan and the true character of Satan and what he really was inside his heart. Not the display that he made, that it was just a righteous act to get off an unjust ruler from the throne of the universe. No, God knew what was in Satan's heart, and he wanted that to come out more openly, so that people realize what he really was. Would you say anything else to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I think as well as Satan's character is really being exposed for kind of, he's exposed as a fraud and a bit of a huckster, really.
Yeah.
God's character is also revealed, and it's ultimately revealed through Jesus at the cross. His character is ultimate love, in contrast with Satan, who's just complete selfishness. So yeah, that awesome. Thanks for that, Jesse. That gives a really good kind of framework for the rest of our discussion. And what I want to do, we're going to skip forward a bit and then work our way back again. And I want to go to Revelation chapter 21. And this is really where things wrap up. So as we said, there's a lot of pain and suffering and evil caused by Satan at the moment. But Revelation 21 talks about how the world's not always going to be that way. God is going to recreate our world and make it so that there is no more pain and suffering. And in Revelation 21, it says, this is from the perspective of the Apostle John, who's in a vision. He says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also, there was no more sea." So that first part, is a bit self-explanatory. Okay, God makes a new heaven and new earth. But then it's got this weird detail at the end, and there was no more sea. I don't know about you, but when I first read that, I was kind of scratching my head going, all right, cool fact, John. Like,
it seems completely way out of place. Like, what were you thinking?
Yeah, like, okay, is he just giving a bit of the geography, or, what's going on? And really what John is doing here, he's not trying to give us geographical details, really. He's not that interested in, making sure we can draw a map or something. He's in vision, and he's giving a theological message. And so really what we need to think of is, okay, well, what kind of spiritual significance does the sea or the ocean have throughout the rest of the Bible? Jesse, do you have any kind of maybe insights into that? Like, what does the sea often represent for us in the Bible?
Well, first of all, I did a little bit of research before the podcast, and I was looking at how ancient cultures saw the sea, and basically they saw it as chaos. It's this unknown thing that's often dangerous, a bit confronting. I mean, you can't live in it. I mean, like, we have the privilege today of knowing to a certain extent what's in the ocean. We have divers, and we have submarines, and we have cameras, and we can sort of have a fairly good understanding about what's in the ocean. But to the ancient world, they knew barely nothing. I mean, besides from what they saw, obviously the coastlines and them sailing on their ships, compared to us, they knew nothing. And so to them, it was chaos. It was the unknown. It was dangerous. And so I think that should definitely help, I guess, play a certain, give us a certain image of what to expect from the biblical story. As far as what the Bible is concerned, I know that in Revelation, I believe, often is it the beast that comes from out of the sea? Maybe from this, and so it's often a place where God's enemies come from, I believe, in the Bible. I'm not super knowledged up on this. Perhaps you could add to that, Chris, but I believe that's basically it, right? The beast comes from the place where God's enemies come from.
No, that's exactly it. And we see that in Revelation and in Daniel as well. In Daniel's vision in chapter 7, all of these big beasts come out from the sea. So when John talks about in Revelation, he's just pulling from Daniel. And just going back to kind of, what you said about ancient cultures. I mean, our culture today, we've explored more of outer space than we have the ocean, still to this day.
That's true.
Which is crazy, it's space is a lot harder to reach. I guess going deep down into the ocean is pretty hard as well, because of the pressure. But
true.
Getting something out of the gravitational, force of our planet, that's pretty difficult. And yet we've done that and explored more of that outside than we have our own ocean. So even today, I think that there's a few remnants of that kind of general fear and anxiety around this kind of unknown area. And I think the other thing is it's just uncontrollable. It's untamable. No one can tame the waves, or a typhoon or anything like this. It's
like a lot of when you look at like some of the sea gods of ancient cultures as well, like they were kind of reckless and untamable. Like I think Poseidon, he was also the god of the sea, but also earthquakes, and so like it's a destructive force. It's like untamable, yeah. And honestly, I think I still have a healthy fear of the ocean to some respect today. I mean, you've got to, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And why is it like in mythology, the god of the sea is never like, this just chill guy who's just, he's always angry or something. But it was because the people were trying to, explain the world around them and be like, well, why is the ocean so temperamental and dangerous? But yeah, coming back to that kind of second theme of it's a place where these enemies arise from that come to attack God and his people. So if the ocean and the waters represent like chaos and strife and danger, then the embodiment of this kind of suffering and evil comes out from the ocean. And there are a few examples that we're going to have a look at, and maybe Jesse, if you want to read out those 2 verses in Ezekiel, and I'll have a look at Jeremiah. And it's interesting, in Daniel and Revelation, the beasts that are talked about there are like a lion and a leopard and a bear and these kind of amalgamation of different things, and that's in what we call apocalyptic literature. That's very symbolic and like that. These other 2 prophets, Ezekiel and Jeremiah, they're more traditional prophets. So they're not apocalyptic. So they're not using kind of these big symbols and stuff. And what they decide to refer to these enemies of God as, they're kind of like sea monsters or serpents or dragons. Now, the Hebrew word for it is tanin. And in each one of these verses, we're going to find the word tanin, obviously translated into English for us. But yeah, the word tanin can be translated as a sea monster or a serpent or a dragon, kind of any one of those variations. So yeah, let's see if we can spot some tanins.
Sounds good. So yeah, the first verse is Ezekiel 29, verse 3, I believe. Do you want me to read them all in succession, or do you want one at a time and then we'll break it down?
Yeah, just read them in succession. Yep.
Sounds good. Cool. So yeah, Ezekiel chapter 29, verse 3 says, "Speak to him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, you great monster lying among your streams. You say, the Nile belongs to me. I made it for myself." The second verse is also in Ezekiel chapter 32 and verse 2. It reads, "Son of man, take up a lament concerning Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say to him, you are like a lion among the nations. You are like a monster in the seas, thrashing about in your streams, churning the water with your feet and muddying the streams." And the final verse is in Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 34. "Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has devoured us. He has thrown us into confusion. He has made us an empty jar. Like a serpent, he has swallowed us and filled his stomach with our delicacies, and then has spewed us out."
All right, some awesome, intense, full-on Bible passages there.
Yeah.
And what translation are you reading from there, Jesse?
That was the NIV, New International Version.
NIV, awesome. So depending on what translation you have, some will say monster, some will say serpent, some will say dragon. But yeah, whatever translation you're reading at home as you read along with us, you'll easily be able to identify what the tanin is. You'll pick it up pretty quickly. And it's really cool, isn't it? Like all of these, like the Pharaoh, he lives in the Nile, in the kind of ocean bed, and the king of Nebuchadnezzar, he swallows things up like a monster and he spits them out. And yeah, these are 2 of the really big enemies of God's people, Egypt and Babylon, the Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, and they're both called tanins. They're both these monsters.
These destructive sea monsters, yeah.
Yeah. So you might be scratching your head and going, okay, what's this got to do with Satan? Like where does Satan come into this? Well, what if I were to tell you that the Bible also refers to Satan as a tanin? He is like Nebuchadnezzar, like the Pharaoh of Egypt, he's one of these enemies of God that is a serpent or a monster of some kind. And we read about that in Revelation 12:9. And this is one of the, this is right in the story of one of Satan's downfalls. This is one of the downfalls that is discussed in the sermon. And it says this. Yeah, this is perfect. This is literally him experiencing one of his downfalls. So it says, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Mm-hmm. So he's described as a great dragon, and that word dragon there, the Greek word is drakon. Mm-hmm. And this actually makes sense. You're already familiar with this term because you've probably heard of the term, like if a ruler has a draconian rule, they're, like a tyrant, they're tough. And it comes from a Roman emperor, either Dracon or Draconian, I forget which, but either way, his name is based on this Greek word Drakon, which means dragons. He was the dragon emperor. He was tough. He was a tyrant. And Satan's the same. He's this tough, mean tyrant. But the word Drakon, so when people wanted to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek, so the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek, when they came to the word Tanin, so these monsters that we read about, they used the Greek word Drakon. So they thought that a good equivalent word in Greek for the Tanin sea monster was a Drakon, what we call a dragon. Now, Jesse, I'm sure you've heard many a sermon on, Satan being cast out here, and you always have an accompanying PowerPoint slide. And what does the dragon look like in all of these artistic renditions?
Ooh, something akin to the Smaug from Lord of the Rings, like devilish eyes, horns, big wings, fiery breath, the whole shebang. Yeah.
And I was kind of blown away when I thought, well, hang on, if the Drakon is the equivalent of the Tanin, and the Tanin is like a sea monster or a sea dragon, maybe the Drakon here in Revelation should look a bit more like that rather than the dragon we typically see. Like even the dragon we kind of see is more from our Western culture anyway.
That's heavily influenced by like myths and lots of legends over the years. Exactly. So we shouldn't have that image when we read the text.
Yeah, it's probably not reliable anyway. So, and no harm in using it. It's fine. But I guess if you want to get really accurate, someone's got to come up with a sea serpent version of that. I want to see that.
Draw a few gills or something. And then
put some gills on it. And and here's what's so cool. We're just going to dip our toe back into the Old Testament once more. The most famous Tanin that everyone knows is Leviathan. And like, you can't escape Leviathan. I mean, he even makes like cameos in just general pop culture. He's like one of these Bible characters that breaks out of just the Christian world, kind of like Goliath. Everyone knows who Goliath is, and everyone knows who the Leviathan is. But there's a bit more to the Leviathan than we would initially suspect. And this is in Isaiah 27:1. And Isaiah here, God through Isaiah proclaims judgment on the Leviathan. Now, this is weird if the Leviathan is just an ordinary creature, if God were to be like, okay, all right, lions, it's time for your judgment. Like, okay, a bit unusual or
a bit odd, yeah.
All right, time to line up, spider. Even if we were thinking of perhaps even bigger, greater, on a bigger scale animals, it still just is a bit unusual for God to pronounce judgment on a creature that can't make moral decisions. But we've since learned a lot more about these tannins and dracons. So we've got a bit more insight now into what's going on here with Leviathan. Do you want to read out for us 27:1?
Yeah, sure thing. Isaiah 27:1. In that day, the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea.
So in case it wasn't clear enough there, Isaiah says 3 times serpent, serpent, monster or reptile. He's
getting the point across.
Yeah, very much so. And I think here we're getting a bit of a clue. This Leviathan might be symbolic in a way of the character of Satan. We know that the enemies of God are these tannins. Satan in Revelation is like the ultimate tannin. He's the ultimate dragon. And here we've got a dragon who is under judgment. And we're not told who it is, like the Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar. He's just called the Leviathan. And I think, the most likely candidate we'd have would be to point to Satan. And I think it even makes sense in the story that people know Leviathan most from, which is from Job. At the end of the story, God says to Job, like, hey, look, I even control Leviathan. Like, what do you have to be worried about? And if you think how Job's story starts, it starts with God and Satan. And perhaps the book is also finishing with God saying, I've got Satan, right where I want him, basically. Like, you don't have to worry about him. He's not doing anything that I'm not letting him do. He only has as much wiggle room as I allow him to have,
I set the boundaries of the city. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That's cool.
Feel free to use it whenever you want.
I will. I'm going to use that next time. And yeah, so looking at all of these examples of the tannins and the dracons, it's all cool to know, but and maybe you can tease this out a bit for us, Jesse. What kind of spiritual application do we get from this? Like, how do we make this relevant to us, all this stuff about dragons and monsters in the ocean?
I guess, like, Isaiah really helps us in this regard. Like, the Lord is great and strong. He's got his huge sword, and he will punish Leviathan. Like, he will slay Leviathan. Like when I picture Leviathan, I think of something pretty scary, something strong, something powerful, as I'm sure like everyone thinks of. And so I think of Satan, he's obviously strong, he's obviously powerful, and that we should have, I think, a healthy fear, as like you should have a healthy fear of sharks. You should have a healthy fear of anything dangerous and strong. But that in the end, God is going to slay Leviathan. He is strong and mighty, and he's got a huge sword, and he will slay Leviathan. And in the end, as powerful and as crafty and as worrisome Satan is to us, we know that in the end, he is defeated. First of all, at the cross, Satan is defeated. But yeah, we don't have to fear when we've got an all-powerful God. I'll reuse the line. He has set the boundaries of the sea.
I like it.
He keeps Leviathan in his place. Like, he does have a little bit of wiggle room, as you say, Chris. The sea is his wiggle room, but like, he's a sea creature. When God stops him, where he can stop him, because God is still in control. So it does give you that hope and that comfort, though, that God's with us.
Yeah, awesome. No, I love that. And there's one more cameo that the Tannin make in Genesis 1:21. And some translations, I reckon they're a bit coy. They're playing a bit coy because they're not sure what to do with this. Some of them will say like a whale or creatures of the deep. And I think that's a little bit misleading, because in Genesis 1:21 it says God made the Tannin. He made these great serpents or dragons or beasts, whatever you want to call them. And you'd think to yourself, why is God making these things? Like, aren't these the bad guys? Well, before the fall, there were no enemies of God on earth, and everything was perfect. These were
Yeah.
creatures of great beauty and kind of pointed to the majesty and supreme power of God.
I guess similar to Satan, right? Who was once a covering cherub,
Mm.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because in most other creation stories, like in the ancient Near East at this time, in order for the god to tame the sea, they always had to tame some sort of sea serpent or sea dragon. Probably the most famous is the Babylonian goddess Tiamat. She was the dragon of the sea, and I forget which god it is. I think it's Tammuz.
Marduk? Oh, yeah.
Oh, maybe Marduk. Maybe Marduk. Yeah, one of the two. Like has to wrestle Tiamat to get control of the ocean, right?
Yeah.
And I love Genesis also features this Tanin, this serpent. God doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't lift a finger because God made them. They're not this beast that's outside of his control. He doesn't have to wrestle them to get the seas under his command. He already has that. He already controls the world. He controls the sea. He controls the Tanin because he made it. Like, it's subservient to God. It's nowhere near in competition with God, like the sea serpents in these other creation stories where there's this tussle. Like, in those stories, it's like, oh, it could go either way. But with God, like, it's a clear victory. Like, these beasts are under God. God is the one who reigns supreme. And I just think it's so cool that word Tanin is used there as a kind of like a little bit of a jab to those other ancient cultures, to be like, you reckon your God's cool because he fought the dragon? Our God made, the sea dragon, that's how powerful he is. So, well, Jesse, I'm going to let you wrap up here because I like your little catchphrase that you've come up with. And I want to bring it all the way back to that first verse we read, which was that when God creates a new heaven and a new earth, there's not going to be any sea. And so maybe you want to wrap up for us why that's relevant and find a way to squeeze in your catchphrase.
Will do. Okay, I'll try my best. So right now, like, the Satan is, I think you mentioned this in your sermon, woe to the earth, because he's down here and he's making a wreck of the place and the wreck of God's people. He still has some wiggle room, that God has set the boundaries of the sea, but there's still a sea. There's still a sea serpent. But if there's no sea, how can there be any sea serpent, right? And so what makes the new earth and the new heaven so amazing is that there is no more Satan. There is no more sea. There's no more sea serpent. And we are free to live our lives with God, with each other, without an adversary, without someone trying to destroy us, to eat us, as a sea serpent would want to do. And so it's a beautiful picture of a peaceful, perfect environment with no more Satan, no more sea monster. And we are happy, we are free to live with in relationship with God forever without anyone trying to disrupt that or disharmonize that. And I think that's beautiful. And I think I squeezed in that saying, so hopefully that's all right.
Nice. No, that's absolutely perfect. And yeah, look, to our listeners at home, I really hope that this could give you a lot of encouragement and hope. We've kind of explored all sorts of different areas of the Bible today and looked at Satan and his allies, these enemies of God, and the fact that God's reigning supreme. He's controlling everything, and he's allowing Satan and his allies to have some temporary limited freedom, but that's going to come to an end very quickly. And perhaps you are experiencing at the moment some of the results of that rebellion of Satan, the consequences of sin and living in just this broken world, this imperfect world. If you are experiencing that, I do want to also say the fact that there's a future hope doesn't diminish the fact that you may be going through intense suffering and pain and misery and grief right now. God knows where we are as humans. He knows that when we lose a loved one, or a loved one gets sick, or when, we're in desperate need, financially, or whatever it might be. God knows that we're humans. We're creatures that live in the present, and we worry about present things. And God doesn't deny us the opportunity to come to him and tell him, hey, I'm stressed. Hey, I'm upset. I'm grieving. I'm confused. Whatever it is, we can take that to God. But God also is able to offer us a peace that only he can give. And sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it takes time. But the reason we can have that ultimate peace, the reason that there is any hope at all, is because of that future restoration of the world that is to come. And so I hope that can be encouraging to you, that while you may be experiencing trials and suffering now, go take it to God. God wants to hear you. God is not going to diminish the fact that we do live in a broken and sinful world and we do suffer, but he's also going to be able to give you hope and give you peace because of that fact that there is no sea in that new heaven and new earth. There is no evil. There is no place for Satan and his allies to be. There's no place found for them there anymore. They're gotten rid of, and all pain and suffering is gotten rid of too. And really, if you want to be there in that new heaven and new earth, it's pretty simple. It's the easiest thing that any of us can do, which is to accept what Jesus has done for us, accepting that loving sacrifice he made on the cross, where he paid for the penalty of our sins. And if you can do that, then you have secured your place in that new heaven and new earth, and you have ensured that you're going to see Jesus face to face one day, that the God who really did everything so that we could be brought back to him and brought back into this perfect world that he wants for us. So I hope that if you haven't made that decision yet, I hope that the conversation that Jesse and myself have had has maybe convicted you or inspired you to do that. And it's as simple as just talking to God and saying, yes, God, I want to accept what Jesus has done for me. And perhaps if you're a listener and this is knowledge that you've known for a long time, perhaps this is something that you need to share with someone else. That maybe there's someone in your life that is going through that pain and suffering and just needs to know that God is going to sort things out in the end. Well, there we go. We've covered dragons. We've covered about war in heaven. We've kind of gone a bit all over the place today.
We have, and we ended with the gospel, so that can't end at a better place than that. So I think it's all right.
Exactly. Well, look, I just want to thank you again, Jesse, for coming and spending your time talking with me about sea dragons.
I mean, who would say no to that? I mean, who doesn't about sea dragons? So my pleasure, Chris. It's been great. It's been good.
Awesome. And of course, to all our listeners, make sure to watch out for our next few episodes. As I said, these are going to be the final stages of the After Sermon podcast year. We've really enjoyed talking and having you all along for the journey with us over these years. And as we kind of go into these last final podcasts together, I just really hope that you'll be able to join us for them as we talk about a few more of these really important topics about God and the Bible and about you and your life as well. So, of course, with all that being said, from all of us here at the After Sermon podcast, thank you for listening. Make sure to listen next week. Have a good one and good night.